The snow was still falling when Elena Vasquez realized she had made a terrible mistake by hoping. She stood in the center of the Iron Veil Pack's courtyard, surrounded by hundreds of people who had known her since she was a child, and every single one of them was staring at her with wide eyes and parted lips. The blood moon hung enormous and red above the tree line, casting a deep crimson light across the stone yard, across the torches, across the faces of people who had never paid her much attention before tonight. The bond thread had appeared between her chest and the chest of the man standing 20 feet away from her, and that thread was glowing with a silver-white light so strong it hurt to look at directly. That man was King Caden Ashvale. Elena had not moved a single step. She could not. Her legs had turned to stone the moment the bond revealed itself, when she felt that warm pull in her chest, like a hand reaching in and tugging her toward him. She had always heard other wolves describe the bond as something beautiful, something that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long winter. And for the first half-second, that was exactly what it was. Warm, certain, like coming home after years of being away. Then she saw his face. Caden Ashvale was not smiling. He was not looking at her with wonder, or warmth, or any of the expressions she had watched other bonded pairs exchange over the years. He was looking at her the way a man looks at a problem he did not expect and does not want. His jaw was set hard, and his dark eyes moved over her once, just once, with the cold efficiency of someone taking inventory of something disappointing. Elena was 23 years old. She was the daughter of a pack healer who had died when Elena was 12, raised after that by a woman named Margot who ran the pack's herb stores and had no patience for self-pity. Elena had grown up learning how to be invisible in a pack that forgot she existed most of the time. She had learned to take up as little space as possible. She had learned to be useful and quiet, and never to want things that were not already hers to have. She had never, not once, allowed herself to want Caden Ashvale. Not because he was cruel, not then at least, but because he was the king, and kings did not belong to girls like her. And now the moon had made a fool of her in front of everyone. Caden stepped forward. The crowd parted for him, the way water parts for a stone. He walked with that slow, deliberate authority that powerful men carry in every step, like the ground itself is expected to be grateful he is standing on it. He stopped 5 feet from Elena, and the bond thread pulsed between them, and everyone in the courtyard held their breath. Elena looked up at him. She was not short, but he was very tall, and in that moment, in that red moonlight, he seemed to take up all the space in the world. He looked at her for a long moment, then he spoke. "I reject this bond." His voice was not loud. He did not shout it or announce it with drama. He said it the way someone states a simple fact about the weather, flat, certain, done. 4 words, and they landed in Elena's chest like 4 separate stones dropped into still water, each one sending rings of pain spreading outward in every direction. The courtyard erupted, not in anger but in shock. People turned to each other. Someone gasped. Elena heard a woman near the back say, "He cannot do that during the blood moon," in a horrified whisper, and a man next to her said he just did. Elena did not move. She stood very still, the way she had learned to stand still during the years when being invisible was safer than being noticed, and she let Caden's words sit in the air between them, and she breathed carefully through her nose, and she did not cry. She would not cry here. Not in front of all these people. Not in front of him. Caden turned and walked away. Just like that, no explanation, no second look. The crowd moved to let him pass, and then he was gone, through the main doors of the keep, and the doors shut behind him, and Elena was still standing in the courtyard, in the blood moon light, with 400 people staring at her. The bond thread had gone dark, not completely. She could still feel the faint ghost of it in her chest, like the outline left on a wall after a picture has been taken down. But the glow was gone, the warmth was gone, and what was left was a cold ache that she had no name for yet. She turned and walked in the opposite direction. She did not run. Running would have looked like fleeing, and she was not fleeing. She walked with her back straight and her eyes forward, past the rows of stunned faces, past the torches that were still burning cheerfully, as though nothing had happened, out through the side gate of the courtyard, and down the path that led to the eastern edge of the pack's grounds. She walked until she reached the old oak tree at the boundary, the one she used to climb as a girl when the world felt too close, and she sat down in the snow at its roots and she finally let herself breathe. The tears came without warning. She was not prepared for them. She had thought she was holding herself together, And then the cold air hit her face, and the silence hit her all at once, and her chest simply gave way. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, and she cried quietly in the dark, in the snow, alone, with the blood moon watching from above. The snow kept falling, fine and soft and indifferent. She did not know how long she sat there, long enough for her to stop shaking, long enough for the moon to shift in the sky, long enough for the cold to get into her bones and make her body feel as numb as everything else felt right now. When she finally looked down, she noticed something strange. The snow around her had taken on a faint silver color, not from the moonlight, which was still that deep red, but from something else entirely. She touched the snow with her fingertip, and it left a silver smear on her skin. She touched her face and realized the wetness on her cheeks was not quite clear. In the red light of the moon, her tears looked silver. She wiped her face and looked at her hand. There, on the back of her fingers, in tiny gleaming drops, silver. She stared at them for a long moment. Then she pressed her hand into the snow and stood up, because sitting in the cold and staring at strange things was not going to help her, and she had learned long ago that the only way to survive a thing was to get up and keep moving. She walked back to her cottage at the edge of the pack grounds. It was a small house, 2 rooms, with a fireplace in the main room, and a window that looked out toward the forest. It had been her mother's house before it was hers, and it still smelled faintly of dried herbs and pine wood, even after all these years. She lit a fire and sat in front of it, with a blanket around her shoulders, and she thought very carefully about what her life was going to look like now. Being rejected during the blood moon was not unheard of. It was rare, because most people had enough sense not to publicly dismiss a bond that the moon itself had chosen, but it had happened before. The histories said it caused lasting pain for both parties, a kind of low ache that never fully went away. But the rejected wolf was not obligated to remain in the pack. She could leave. She could request transfer to another territory, start over somewhere new, build a life among people who would not always look at her as the woman the king had turned away. She thought about leaving. She let herself think about it carefully, weighing it in her mind, the way Margot had taught her to weigh difficult things, without rushing, without letting her emotions tip the scale before she was ready. She thought about the work she did here. She thought about the people in the pack who came to her when they were sick, when their children had fevers, when the older members needed someone to sit with them and help ease their pain. She was not grand or powerful, but she was needed. She had made herself needed, quietly, over years. She thought about leaving all of that. Then she thought about staying, and about seeing Caden Ashvale's face every time there was a pack gathering, and about the way everyone would always know, and about how that ache in her chest might feel when she saw him moving through his world as though nothing had happened. She was still thinking about it 3 days later, when the guards arrived. There were 4 of them, in the dark gray cloaks of the king's personal guard, and they knocked on her door at 8 in the morning, while she was in the middle of grinding willow bark for a cough remedy. She opened the door and looked at them, and felt a quiet, cold anger settle somewhere behind her ribs. The guard in front, broad-shouldered, young, a little uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "Elena Vasquez?" "Yes. You are summoned to the Glass Keep. The king requests your presence." She looked at him for a moment. "Does he?" "Today, if possible." She leaned against the doorframe and looked past him at the other 3, who were staring carefully at the middle distance, in the way people do, when they want to pretend they are not hearing a conversation. Then she looked back at the first guard. "He rejected me 3 days ago, in front of the entire pack," she said. "And now he is sending 4 men to summon me to his home. What does he want?" The guard looked briefly pained. "I was not given the details, ma'am. Only the message." She thought about saying no. She wanted to say no. She wanted to close the door and go back to her willow bark, and let Caden Ashvale sit in his glass fortress, with whatever problem he had decided she could solve for him. The anger in her chest very much wanted to do exactly that. But there was something underneath the anger. A faint pulse. The ghost of the bond thread, still there in her chest, still connected to something even now. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum and felt it, distant, muted, like a heartbeat heard through a thick wall. He had rejected the bond, not severed it. There was a difference, and she was starting to understand that the difference mattered. "Give me an hour," she said. She packed a bag. She told Margot where she was going. Margot said nothing for a long moment, and then she said come back in one piece, which was the closest thing to a blessing the woman ever gave. Elena thanked her and followed the guards up the long road to the Glass Keep. The Glass Keep had been built 200 years ago by the third Ashvale king, a man known for his dramatic tastes. The outer walls were reinforced stone, but the towers were made from a strange mineral compound that looked like frosted glass from a distance, opaque, pale, faintly blue in cold weather, catching and breaking the light in a way that made the whole structure shimmer when the sun hit it at the right angle. Up close it was less romantic. The glass was very thick and very cold to the touch, and it made the interior of the towers dim and drafty. Elena had been inside the keep only once before, as a child, when her mother had been called to help treat an illness that had spread through the staff quarters. She remembered it as a place of long corridors and echoing footsteps, and people who walked very fast and looked very busy and never made eye contact with anyone. It was exactly the same now. The guards led her through the main gate, across a courtyard swept clean of snow, and through a side entrance that took them down a corridor lit by oil lamps hung from iron brackets. Servants passed them in both directions without speaking. Elena kept her chin level and her hands loose at her sides, and told herself she was not nervous, which was not true, but was something she needed to believe for the next few minutes. They stopped in front of a heavy door at the end of a corridor, and one of the guards knocked twice. A voice from inside said enter, and the guard pushed the door open and stepped aside. Elena walked in. It was a study, not a throne room, not a formal chamber. A study, with bookshelves on 2 walls and a fireplace on the third, and a large desk covered in maps and papers. The room was warm compared to the corridor, and it smelled of wood smoke and something dry and faintly sharp, like old parchment. Caden Ashvale was standing at the window with his back to her. He was not in ceremonial clothing. He was wearing dark trousers and a plain dark shirt, and he had one hand braced against the window frame, and he was looking out at the courtyard below, with the focused inattention of a man who is not actually seeing what he is looking at. Elena stopped in the center of the room and waited. A long silence stretched between them. The fire crackled. Outside, a bird called once and went quiet. Caden finally turned. He looked tired. That was the first thing she noticed. There were shadows under his eyes, and a tightness around his mouth that had not been there 3 nights ago in the courtyard. He was still the most composed man she had ever been in a room with, posture straight, expression controlled, every detail of him assembled with careful precision, but underneath all of that he looked like someone who had not slept in 3 days. She understood, with the kind of knowledge that comes from a bond even when it has been rejected, that the sleeplessness was at least partly connected to her. Not a fault she had committed, simply a consequence. A rejected bond does not disappear. It pulls. It aches. It makes the distance between 2 people feel like a wound that will not close. He had chosen this. She had not. You came, he said. Your guards were very polite, she said. It seemed rude not to. Something moved through his eyes. Not quite humor, but adjacent to it. It was gone in a moment. He moved away from the window and stood on the other side of the desk, not sitting, just standing there, with his hands at his sides and his expression careful. I need your help, he said. I am a healer, she said. That is what I do. This is not a typical healing situation. No, she agreed. I suspected that. He looked at her for a moment, and she had the strange experience of watching a very powerful man try to decide how much truth to give her. She recognized the expression because she had seen it on the faces of men who came to her for help and were ashamed of what was wrong with them. There was a particular kind of pride that made asking for help feel like admitting defeat, and Caden Ashvale had that pride in greater quantities than most. The bond, he said finally, is not behaving the way rejected bonds are supposed to behave. I know. He looked slightly surprised that she answered so quickly. You have noticed it too. It is still there, she said. I can feel it, not the way it felt on the blood moon night, but it is still there, like something unfinished. He nodded once, slowly. The court scholars have been looking into it. They believe the rejection may not have taken hold properly. There are accounts, very old accounts, of cases where a bond during the blood moon resisted rejection, where the bond held regardless of what either party declared. She looked at him steadily. And what do they recommend? There is a substance called Snowglass, he said. Old medicine, very old. The scholars say it was used by pack healers, centuries ago, to determine the truth of a bond, whether it was real, fated, or constructed, whether it would hold. Elena had heard of Snowglass. Margot had mentioned it once, in passing, as something from the old records that no one used anymore, because the ingredients were nearly impossible to obtain, and the effects were unpredictable. She had not given it much thought at the time. It had seemed like something from a story. "What does it do?" she asked. "It reveals truth," he said. "In the person who drinks it. Whatever is hidden in their bond, in their blood, the Snowglass brings it to the surface." She looked at him. "And you want me to drink it?" "Yes. Because you want to know if the bond is real. Because I need to know what we are dealing with," he said. "And the scholars believe only the rejected party, only you, can reveal the bond's nature through the Snowglass. If the bond is fated and true, it will appear. If it was somehow forced or constructed, that will appear instead." Elena thought about this. She thought about the silver color of her tears 3 nights ago in the snow. She thought about the ghost pull in her chest that had not faded in 3 days. She thought about Margot saying come back in one piece, and she thought about whether agreeing to drink an ancient and unpredictable substance at the king's request was the decision of a sensible person. "And if I say no?" she asked. "Then you are free to go," he said. "I will not force you, but the bond will continue as it is, unresolved, pulling on both of us, with no understanding of what it is, or why it is behaving the way it is." The fire popped behind her. She turned the situation over in her mind. Then she straightened. "I will need to know exactly what Snowglass contains," she said. "I am a healer. I need to know what I am agreeing to put in my body, and I will need 2 days to review the scholars' research myself, before I agree to anything." He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. "Agreed." She turned to leave, and then stopped. "One more thing," she said. "What?" She looked back at him, over her shoulder. "Whatever the Snowglass shows, you tell me. All of it. Not a version of it, not a selection. Everything it reveals, I hear." He held her gaze. "Agreed," he said again. She walked out, and the cold corridor wrapped around her, and she pressed her hand against her chest, where the bond lived like a low, stubborn ember, and she thought, whatever is in that glass, I am going to find out the truth. The truth, she had learned, was always better than the dark, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. She followed the corridor back toward the entrance, her footsteps quiet and even, and the glass keep held its breath around her, as though it already knew that everything was about to change. Elena spent 2 full days in the keep's East Library. The room was long and narrow, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadow, and shelves that ran floor to ceiling on both sides, crammed with books and scrolls and leather folders tied with old ribbon. The scholars had left a stack of materials on the central table for her, 12 documents in total, the oldest dating back nearly 2 centuries. She sat down and read every single one. The Snowglass records were strange. Most of them were case histories written by pack healers of earlier generations, brief and careful in the way that healers write when they are recording facts without allowing themselves to be pulled into the drama of what they are describing. She had been trained to write the same way. She recognized the voice. What she learned was this. Snowglass was a preparation made from 3 rare substances: the crystallized sap of the moonbloom tree, which only flowered during blood moon cycles, the mineral compound found in underground springs beneath ancient pack territories, and a single drop of water collected from the first frost of the year, before any foot had touched the ground it fell on. The combination, when prepared correctly, created a liquid that was colorless at room temperature, but turned a deep blue when warmed. It tasted, according to 3 separate accounts, like cold air, like breathing in very deeply on a winter morning and tasting the frost in the back of the throat. The effects varied. In the case histories, most people who drank Snowglass during the blood moon period experienced a period of heightened clarity, followed by a release of what the old healers called bound truth, information or reality that had been suppressed or hidden in the blood bond. In some cases, this appeared as vivid imagery, almost like dreaming while awake. In other cases, it appeared as a physical symptom, a change in temperature, a brief luminescence of the skin, or, and here Elena stopped reading and read the sentence again, a change in the character of the subject's tears. She sat very still for a moment. A change in the character of the tears. She thought about the snow around the base of the oak tree 3 nights ago, about the silver smear on her fingertip. She had told no one about that. She had not thought it was significant, Or she had told herself she had not thought it was significant. But the truth was, she had put it in a corner of her mind marked wait and see, and had been quietly watching it from a distance for 3 days. She turned back to the records and found the relevant section. 2 of the case histories mentioned silver tears specifically. In both cases, the silver tears had appeared before the Snowglass was administered, in the hours following a rejected or disrupted bond, during a blood moon ceremony. The healers who recorded these cases noted it with careful understatement, describing it as an indication of bond activation at a deeper level, meaning the bond was already doing something, already revealing something, before the Snowglass was ever introduced. In both cases, when Snowglass was subsequently administered, the silver tears returned during the experience, and caused a physical reaction in the environment around the subject. In one case, the floor beneath the subject showed old runes. In the other case, the walls of the room became briefly visible in a way they had not been before. Elena closed the document, and sat with her hands flat on the table, and thought about this very carefully. She was already responding to something. The Snowglass, if she drank it, would not be introducing something new. It would be accelerating something that was already underway. She did not know whether that made her feel better or worse. She decided it made her feel more prepared, which was the thing she most needed right now. On the evening of the second day, she asked to see the scholars. 3 of them came. An older woman named Dr. Adele, who had the sharp-eyed patience of someone who had spent decades reading things most people found too dry to bother with, and 2 younger men who deferred to her constantly and took notes on small pads. Elena went through her questions methodically. Were there any recorded cases of adverse reactions to Snowglass? Yes, 2, both involving people who had consumed it outside of the blood moon period, which was inadvisable. Were there any cases where the experience lasted longer than an hour? 1, and the subject had been fine afterward, simply very tired. Had anyone ever experienced permanent effects? Not in any of the records they had access to, though the records were incomplete. She thanked them. They left. She sat alone in the library for another hour. Then she went to find Caden. He was in his study again. She was beginning to understand this was where he spent most of his time, and this time he was sitting at the desk, with a stack of documents in front of him, though he put them aside when she came in without being asked. "I have read everything," she said. "And? I have one question that is not in the records." He waited. "Why you?" she asked. "You rejected the bond. The Snowglass works on the rejected party, not the one who rejected. So this is about what is in my bond, my blood, and the result, whatever it is going to give you information. What do you do with that information? What happens after the truth comes out?" He looked at her for a long time without answering. The fire between them crackled. He leaned back in his chair slightly, and in the lamplight the tiredness in his face was more visible than ever. "I want to understand what I am dealing with," he said. "That is the honest answer. The bond is not behaving normally. I rejected it, and it held. That means either the bond is something extraordinary, or it means something else is involved, something I was not told about, something that goes back further than the night of the blood moon. I need to know which. And if the Snowglass reveals something that is inconvenient for you, then I will deal with it," he said. "That is not the same as being honest with me about it." He held her gaze. "You asked me to tell you everything it reveals. I agreed. I will honor that." She studied him for a moment. There was something underneath his control that she had been trying to identify for 2 days. Not dishonesty exactly. Not the slippery evasiveness of someone who intended to lie. More like someone who was carrying a weight they had learned to carry so well that they had almost forgotten it was there. "All right," she said. "I will drink it." She saw something move through him, not relief, something more complicated than relief, and then he was standing and moving to the cabinet behind the desk. He opened it and took out a small glass vial. The liquid inside was colorless, barely visible, catching the firelight like water would. He set it on the desk between them. Elena looked at it for a moment, then she picked it up. She did not hesitate any longer, because hesitating any longer would not change what was in the vial, and would only make her hands shake. She drank it. The taste was exactly what the old records had described: cold air, winter frost, the sharp, clean bite of an early morning outside. It moved downward in a slow, spreading coolness that was not unpleasant. She set the empty vial on the desk and straightened and waited. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the room went cold. Not a draft, Not the kind of cold that comes from a window or a door. A cold that came from inside her chest, spreading outward through her ribs and shoulders and down her arms. Not painful, but so sudden and total that she inhaled sharply. The fire in the fireplace did not go out, but it seemed very far away. The lamplight dimmed at the edges of her vision. And then she started to see things. Not with her eyes. Her eyes were still in the study, still seeing the desk and the vial, and Caden standing very still on the other side of it, watching her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, something that looked almost like fear. But underneath that, behind that, she was seeing something else. A room she had never been in. Stone walls, cold and dark, lit by a single candle. A boy, maybe 12, maybe 13, small for his age, with dark hair and serious eyes, sitting on the floor, with his back against the wall, and his knees pulled to his chest. He was not crying. He was past crying. She understood somehow. He had been in this room a long time and the crying had run out. He was just waiting. The door of the room was thick and heavy, and locked from the outside. She could hear, very faintly, voices outside it. Older voices. Men. One of them was speaking with authority, calm, deliberate. The voice of a man accustomed to making decisions that others carried out. She caught a few words. Bond. Bloodline. Vasquez. Permanent. The boy inside the room put his head against his knees and went very still. Then the image shifted. She saw a document, a formal document with a heavy wax seal at the bottom and 2 signatures above it. She could not read all of the text, but the seal was the Ashvale crest, and one of the signatures was older, the signature of a man who had been dead for 6 years, and she knew his name, because everyone in the Iron Vale territory knew his name. The late King Aldrich Ashvale. The second signature was one she did not recognize, a name that began with a letter she caught only briefly, before the image shifted again. Then she was back in the room. Fully back. The cold in her chest was fading, and the lamplight was full and normal again, and her face was wet, and she did not understand why, until she raised her hand to her cheek, and felt the warmth there, and looked at her fingers. Silver. Her tears were silver, gleaming under the lamplight, catching it and throwing it back in tiny scattered sparks. And where the drops had fallen on the floor between her feet, the stone floor of the study had cracked. Shallow hairline cracks running out from each drop, like rays from a small sun, and inside those cracks, barely visible, something was glowing. Runes. She looked up at Caden. He was not moving. He was standing behind his desk, with both hands pressed flat against the surface, and his face, that always controlled face, had lost every wall it usually stood behind. He looked at the runes on the floor, and then he looked at her, and she saw something in his expression that she was not prepared for. Not surprise, not fear. Recognition. He had seen this before, or he had known this was coming. Elena stood very still, with her silver tears drying on her cheeks, and the runes glowing between their feet, and she said nothing. She did not need to say anything yet. She just needed to watch his face. And his face told her enough. He had known something. He had known something before tonight, before the vial, before the blood moon, possibly for a very long time. Whatever the Snowglass had just pulled to the surface of her blood and spread across the floor in silver and light, he had known at least the outline of it. She kept her face calm and her breathing even. She had grown up learning to gather information before making a move, and that patience had never been more necessary than it was right now, standing in the middle of what she had thought was a simple story about a king who did not want her. It was not a simple story at all. She could see that now. The silver on her fingers and the runes on the floor were just the beginning. She wiped her face carefully. She straightened. She looked at him and waited. "Sit down," she said quietly, "and start talking." The silence after Elena's words lasted for 3 heartbeats. Then Caden did something she had not expected. He sat down. Not the careful, controlled motion of a man choosing to lower himself into a position of authority. He sat down the way a person sits when they have been standing a long time under a heavy weight, and something has finally given way. He put his elbows on the desk and pressed one hand over his mouth, and looked at the floor where the runes were still glowing faintly between her feet. Elena did not move from where she stood. She waited. The fire had settled into a low, steady burn. Outside the study windows, the night had gone fully dark and very still. In this room, there was just the 2 of them, and the runes. and whatever was about to come out of him. He did not look at her when he finally started talking. He looked at the desk. "My father made a contract," he said. "When I was 12 years old, I did not know about it until I was 17, and by the time I knew, it had already been in place for 5 years. Elena kept her voice even. "A contract with whom?" "With a healer," he said. "An old healer, from the eastern border of the pack. Her name was Sarah Vasquez." The name landed in Elena's chest like a stone. Sarah Vasquez. Her mother's name. Her mother, who had died when Elena was 12, who had spent years traveling between packs as a healer for hire, before Elena was born, before she settled here, who had never talked much about those years, who had always changed the subject when Elena asked about where she had been and what she had done before the small herb-smelling cottage and the ordinary life. She did not let any of that show in her face. "Go on," she said. Caden looked up at her then, briefly, and she thought he was surprised by how composed she sounded. She was not composed, but she was controlled, which was close enough. "My father wanted to secure the Ashvale bloodline," he said. "Specifically, he was concerned about a weakness in it, something that the pack physicians had identified and told him about when I was young. Not a weakness that made me ill, a weakness in the bond capacity. There have been Ashvale kings who could not form pack bonds at all, full leaders, fully capable in every other way, but the bonding mechanism was absent or misfiring. It meant their packs were never fully stable. The bond between a king and his people is part of what holds a pack together, what makes them feel the pull of loyalty and safety that keeps a pack functioning as a unit, rather than just a collection of individuals living in proximity." He paused. He picked up a pen from the desk and turned it between his fingers. Not writing, just handling it, something to do with his hands. "My father was told there was a way to correct this in the bloodline," he said. "A very old method, from the pre-written histories. If an Ashvale bonded with a healer of a specific bloodline, a bloodline with unusually strong bond capacity, that had been cultivated and tracked for generations by people who understood these things, the weakness would be corrected. The bond capacity would pass forward through the line, and the Ashvale succession would be stable for generations to come." Elena listened carefully. She was beginning to understand where this was going. She was beginning to understand it in the slow, cold way that a person understands something that is both enormous and, in retrospect, somehow inevitable. "The healer he found," she said. "My mother." He met her eyes. "Your mother agreed to the contract," he said. "She was compensated. She was given land, security, a promise that her daughter would always have a home and a place in the Iron Veil pack, that she would be protected and provided for. In exchange, your mother agreed that when the time came, when the bond revealed itself naturally between you and me, she would not interfere. She would not move you away. She would allow the bond to take its course." Elena absorbed this. She thought about her mother, her quiet, careful, herb-scented mother, who had never raised her voice and had always kept a small locked box on the top shelf of the kitchen that Elena had never been allowed to touch. She thought about how her mother had chosen this pack, out of all the packs she could have gone to, and how she had raised Elena to be a healer, to be useful, to be exactly the sort of person who would stay in one place and take care of people around her. She thought about how Sarah Vasquez had died without ever saying a word about any of this. "My mother knew," Elena said. "When I was born, she knew this would happen. She raised me here because she had promised to keep me here." "Yes," he said. "And your father told you when you were 17. "He told me there was a contract," Caden said. "He told me the bond was arranged, that when the blood moon came and revealed a bond between me and a woman from the Vasquez line, that bond would be stronger and more fixed than a natural bond, because it had been built into the bloodline deliberately. He called it a designed bond. He was very matter-of-fact about it. He said it was the responsible thing to do for the pack's future." "And what did you say?" Something moved through his face. Not quite anger, not quite grief, something older than both. "I was 17, he said. "I said what a 17-year-old says to his father, who is also his king, and who has just told him that his future was already decided, without his knowledge or consent. I said nothing. I stored it away. I thought about it for the next 6 years, and tried to decide what to do about it." "And what you decided to do," Elena said, "was reject the bond publicly, so I would be free of it. He looked at her. His expression, stripped of everything he usually kept over it, was very tired and very serious. Yes, he said. Elena stood very still and let that settle. She thought about the courtyard, about the red moon and 400 faces and 4 words that had landed in her chest like stones. She thought about sitting in the snow afterward and crying silver tears that she had not understood. She thought about 3 days of that cold ache and the ghost pull that would not leave, and the way she had come here not because she wanted to, but because she had known, on some level that had nothing to do with pride or anger, that there was something unfinished that needed to be understood. You thought rejecting me would free me, she said. I did not want you bound to me by something your mother agreed to on your behalf, before you were old enough to have a say, he said. I did not want you here because of a contract. I did not think it was fair. It was not fair, she agreed. But rejecting me in front of everyone without explanation was also not fair. No, he said. That was not fair either. The runes on the floor were still faintly glowing. Elena looked down at them and then looked at the silver, still visible on her fingertips. The Snowglass had done exactly what it was supposed to do. It had brought the truth to the surface, not just her bond's truth, but everything that had been built around it and buried inside it for years. She thought about her mother. She thought about the locked box on the kitchen shelf. She thought about all the things she had never been told, and all the choices that had been made for her before she was old enough to make any choices at all. She was angry. She could feel it, very clearly, in the tight space behind her sternum. Not the hot, rushing anger that comes and goes quickly, but the slow, steady kind. The kind that comes from understanding something fully, and knowing it will take a while to process what it means. She was angry at her mother, though her mother was gone, and that anger had nowhere to go. She was angry at Aldrich Ashvale, who was also gone. She was angry at a contract that had been signed before she existed, that had turned her into a solution to a problem she had never been asked about. She was less angry at Caden than she expected to be, which surprised her. The runes, she said. What do they say? He looked at them. He was quiet for a moment, and she realized from the slight narrowing of his eyes that he was reading them. He could read the ancient script, which made sense if he had known about the contract for 6 years, and had spent that time trying to understand it. They confirm the contract, he said. They are essentially the terms, written in the bond itself, in your blood. Your mother's agreement is in there. My father's promise is in there. The terms of the designed bond. He paused. And one other thing. What? He looked up from the floor and met her eyes, and his expression was the most unguarded thing she had seen from him yet. A clause, he said. Added by your mother, apparently, without my father's knowledge. It says that the bond, while designed, cannot be forced. That if the Vasquez healer's daughter ever freely chooses to release the bond, not rejects it, not flees from it, but consciously and freely chooses to dissolve it, the designed elements will dissolve with it and leave both parties free. No pain, no consequence. He let that sit in the air between them. Elena thought about her mother again. She thought about Sarah Vasquez sitting across from a king she had made a deal with, and quietly and carefully writing one last protection into the deal without telling anyone. A way out, hidden inside the thing itself, like a key tucked inside a locked box. She felt something loosen in her chest. Not the bond, that was still there, that ghost pull, unchanged. But something else, some tightness she had been carrying without knowing it. Her mother had not just agreed to something, she had also made sure there was a door. You could have told me this 3 days ago, she said. I could have, he said. I did not have all of it 3 days ago. The scholars did not finish reading the rune records until this morning. But you knew about the contract. I knew about the contract, he agreed. I should have told you. Yes, she said. You should have. She picked up the empty vial from the desk and turned it in her fingers once, then set it back down carefully. She looked at Caden, who was still watching her with that unguarded expression, and she thought about what it was like to be 17 years old and learn that your future had been arranged without your knowledge by your father, and to carry that for 6 years, and then to stand in a courtyard under a blood moon and make a choice that you thought was protecting someone else, even though it looked, from the outside, like the cruelest possible thing. She was not ready to forgive him. She was not ready to forgive anyone quite yet. There was too much to understand, too much to think through, too much that had been hidden for too long. But she was beginning to see the shape of it, and the shape of it was more complicated than the story she had told herself in the snow. "I need to go back to my cottage," she said. "I need time to think." He nodded. "The guards will take you." She moved toward the door. At the threshold she stopped and looked back at him one more time. He was still sitting at the desk, still looking at the runes on the floor, and he looked like a man who had put down something very heavy, and was not yet sure what to do with his hands now that it was gone. "Whatever comes next," she said, "I will decide it myself. Not the bond, not your father's contract. Me." He looked up at her. "Understood," he said, and he meant it. She could see that. She walked out into the cold corridor, and followed the guards back through the keep, and behind her, the runes on the study floor glowed quietly in the dark, spelling out everything that had been hidden for decades, waiting patiently to be seen. Elena did not sleep that night. She sat at the table in her cottage, with a mug of tea that went cold without her drinking it, and she thought. She laid everything out in her mind, the way she laid out ingredients for a remedy, each piece on its own, separate and clear, and then studied how they fit together. The facts were these. Her mother, Sarah Vasquez, had made an agreement with the late King Aldrich Ashvale when Elena was a small child. That agreement had bound the Vasquez bloodline, bound Elena specifically, to a designed bond with the Ashvale heir. The bond was not a gift from the moon. It had been arranged by people who understood the mechanics of wolf bonds at a very precise level. People who knew that certain bloodlines carried capacities that could be built into others through a carefully constructed pairing. Her mother had known all of it, had raised her here, in this pack, near this king-to-be, without ever telling her daughter why. The second set of facts. Caden Ashvale had known about the contract since he was 17. He had carried this knowledge for 6 years, during which time he had watched the blood moon approach, and had made a choice that he believed was protective, rejecting the bond publicly, sacrificing his own comfort and her dignity, to free her from something she had not consented to. It had not worked. The bond had held. It was holding still. The third fact, the one that her mother had hidden even from the king. Elena had the power to dissolve the bond entirely. A free and conscious choice. No pain. No consequence. A door that had always been there, hidden inside the thing itself. She turned this around in her mind for a long time. She tried to be honest with herself about what she felt toward Caden now, knowing what she knew. She had spent 3 days being angry and humiliated, and underneath both of those things, trying not to feel the pull of a bond she had told herself meant nothing. Now she knew why the bond was so strong, why it had not released with the rejection, why her tears had gone silver the same night the blood moon rose. She thought about what he had looked like tonight, when the walls of his explanation finally came down. Not triumphant, not relieved, just tired and honest, in a way that did not suit the cold, authoritative king she had met 3 days ago in the courtyard. She did not trust him yet. She was not close to trusting him. But she was beginning to wonder if the man she had built in her mind from one night's coldness and one brief summons was the whole picture, or just the surface of something she had not yet seen clearly. At dawn she stopped trying to sleep, and instead went into the small room at the back of the cottage that her mother had used as a workroom. She had never changed it much. The shelves were still lined with her mother's collection of reference texts, worn and marked up in her mother's careful handwriting. Elena pulled them out one by one and looked through them, searching. She found what she was looking for in the 4th volume. A small notebook, thinner than the others, easy to miss because it had been slipped between 2 larger books with their spines facing outward. It was written entirely in her mother's hand. The title on the first page was simply, "For E, when it becomes necessary." Elena sat down on the floor with the notebook in her hands. For E. Her name was Elena. Her mother had always called her E. She opened it. The notebook was 30 pages. It was a full explanation, written in her mother's clear, careful healer's hand, of everything. The agreement with Aldrich. The reasons she had agreed to it. The clause she had added without telling him. Every detail that Caden and the scholars had pieced together from ancient rune records and kept documents, her mother had already written down, years ago, and left here for Elena to find. She read it slowly. She read every word. Her mother had not been careless or without feeling. She had been, as best Elena could read her from these pages, a person in a difficult position, making the least harmful choice available to her. She had come to the Iron Veil Pack for work. She had been good at what she did, and had been noticed. The late king had found her through his advisors, through people who tracked certain bloodlines, and he had made her an offer. The offer included permanent housing, a protected place for herself and any children, guaranteed income from the pack treasury for life, and complete safety. The kind of safety that a lone healer traveling between territories and living on her own ability did not otherwise have. She had also known what the alternative was. If she refused, Aldrich would find another way. There were other branches of the old healer bloodlines. He was a determined man with significant resources and no shortage of patience. He would have found someone else. At least this way, her mother wrote, I knew my daughter. I could raise you myself. I could teach you everything I knew. I could make sure you were strong enough. And she had added the clause, the way out. Hidden where Aldrich would not look. Written in the oldest version of the bond language, which Aldrich's people had not studied as carefully as they should have. It had taken someone like Elena, someone raised by Sarah, trained by her, with access to her research, to actually make the clause visible. The Snowglass had done more than reveal the contract. It had activated the clause, made it legible, put the key in Elena's hands. She closed the notebook and held it against her chest, and sat on the floor of her mother's workroom for a long time. Then she stood up. She washed her face. She put on her coat. She walked back up the road toward the glass keep. The guards at the gate recognized her now. They let her through without question. She went directly to Caden's study. He was there, as she expected. He had not slept either. She could tell from the state of the papers on his desk, which had been rearranged several times in the way papers get rearranged when someone is thinking in circles. He looked up when she came in. She put the notebook on the desk in front of him. My mother left this for me, she said. Everything you know and more. I found it this morning. She paused. She loved me. I want you to know that. Even though it is complicated. She made a choice that I did not get a say in. And she also left me every tool I needed to take back my own say. She was trying to do two things at once, and I am not sure they were ever fully compatible, but I understand it now. He looked at the notebook. He did not pick it up. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because you were honest with me last night, she said. And because I have the clause. I have the way out. I can dissolve this bond completely, right now, and we both walk away from all of it. Your father's contract, the designed bond, the pack's assumptions, all of it, gone. He was very still. I know. I have not decided what to do, she said. I want to be clear about that. I have the choice, and I am going to take my time with it. But I came back because I needed you to understand something. What? She looked at him steadily. Whatever I decide, I am deciding it based on what I actually feel and what I actually want for my own life. Not the bond, not my mother's contract, not your father's plan, not guilt or anger, or the fact that everyone in the pack already watched me get turned away in front of them. None of those things are going to make this decision. I am. He held her gaze for a long moment. Something in his face shifted, not dramatically, but quietly, like a lock that has been very slowly worked open finally releasing. That is fair, he said. More than fair. She nodded. I am going to stay in the keep for a while longer, she said. Not as a guest exactly. I would like to look at the rest of the scholars' records. There are elements of the bond design that I want to understand better as a healer, and I want access to the full Snowglass documentation. Done, he said. And I want a room with a window, she said. Not a drafty tower room, something that has actual sunlight in the morning. The smallest thing happened at the corners of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. I will see to it, he said. She picked up her bag and walked toward the door. At the threshold she stopped, as she had the night before, and looked back. One more thing, she said. If you want me to understand you, not the contract, not the bond, just you will have to actually let me. That means talking, without the walls. He was quiet for a moment, then, I am not very good at that. I know, she said, I could tell. Do it anyway. She walked out into the corridor, and this time the cold felt different, like the kind of cold you feel when you step outside on a crisp morning, and your lungs expand, and you are simply, unremarkably alive and present, and moving through the world on your own terms. The glass keep stretched around her in every direction. She was going to learn it. She was going to understand every part of it, and she was going to make her decision in her own time, from her own knowing, with her own hands. The bond thread pulsed once, gently, in her chest. She let it. The room they gave her was on the 3rd floor of the main wing, and it did have a window, a wide one, facing east, so the morning light came in gold and straight and clear. There was a desk and a shelf, and a bed with a thick blanket, and it was clean and warm. It was not a grand room, but it was more than she needed, and she arranged her things in it with the quiet efficiency of a person who has never had much space, and therefore knows how to use what they are given. She fell into a routine within 2 days. She worked in the library in the mornings, going through the Snowglass records and the bond documentation. She spent the afternoons in the keep's healing quarters, which were run by a careful and overworked woman named Dr. Penn, who accepted Elena's help with the pointed relief of someone who has been understaffed for too long. She ate in the staff dining hall, not the main hall, which suited her. She liked the staff. They were direct and busy, and interested in her competence, rather than her history with the king, which was refreshing. She saw Caden at odd moments. He would appear at the door of the library to deliver something the scholars had found, or he would walk through the healing quarters at the end of the day checking on the staff. These encounters were brief and professionally polite. He had not reverted to the cold authority she had met at the beginning. He was not warm exactly. She did not think warmth was something that came easily to him, but he was present, and he was listening, and he was not pretending. On the 5th evening, he came to the library when it was nearly empty, and sat down across the table from her, without being invited, but also without assuming he was welcome. He waited until she looked up from what she was reading. "You said I should talk," he said. She put down her pen. "I did." He looked at the table for a moment. Then he started talking. Not about the contract or the bond or the political situation. About the room. "There was a room," he said, "in the West Tower. My father used it for discipline. When I was young, and had done something he considered unacceptable. It was cold, and very dark, and the door locked from the outside." He stopped again. "I was put in it for the first time when I was 9. For crying in front of the pack at a formal dinner. My father did not think kings should cry." Elena watched him. She thought about the vision she had seen when she drank the Snowglass, the boy with his back against the cold stone wall, past crying, just waiting. She had not told him about that vision. She had not been ready to. "How long were you in there?" she asked. 3 days the first time, he said. He wanted to make sure the lesson held. She did not say anything. She let him continue. "I learned to be very good at not showing what I felt," he said. "Not because I am naturally cold, but because showing it had consequences, and I learned early to protect myself from those consequences." He looked up at her. "I am telling you this because you said to talk without the walls, and because you said you wanted to understand me. This is the relevant part, of how I became the version of myself you met in the courtyard." Elena sat with this for a moment. She thought about a 9-year-old boy put in a dark, cold room for 3 days because he had cried. She thought about what that would do to a person over time, in the years of growing up under that kind of authority, and what kind of walls a person builds when they learn that showing pain is something that gets punished. She thought about her own childhood, about learning to be invisible, about becoming useful so that she could not be easily dismissed. They had both learned to survive by shrinking different parts of themselves, she by making herself smaller, he by making himself harder. "Thank you for telling me," she said. He nodded. He looked like someone who was not sure what to do with being thanked. "The vision I had," she said carefully, "when I drank the Snowglass. I saw something. A room in a tower, stone walls, a single candle, a boy alone inside it." He went very still. "I did not tell you because I was not sure if it was real or just something the Snowglass constructed," she said. "But it was you, was it not? In the West Tower." A long pause. "Yes," he said. "It was real." "Yes." She looked at him across the table, and he looked back, and something in the space between them shifted. Not the bond, not the designed mechanism built by two people who were both now gone. Something else. The kind of thing that happens between people when they are finally, carefully, without any pressure or contract or external force, beginning to actually see each other. She was not ready to name it. She did not need to name it yet. "Go on," she said. "Keep talking." And he did. Winter deepened across the Iron Vale territory. The snow came heavy in the second week of Elena's stay at the Glass Keep, burying the roads and silencing the forest. and turning the courtyard into a smooth white expanse that nobody wanted to walk across, because every footstep left marks. Elena noticed that she had stopped counting the days. She had arrived thinking she would be here for a defined period, working toward a decision she would eventually make, and she had not made the decision yet, and she found she was not in a hurry to. She had learned a great deal in the weeks she had been here. She had read everything the scholars had on the old bond records. She understood the Snowglass better than any healer in the pack, probably better than anyone currently living. She had worked in the healing quarters long enough to know most of the staff by name, and to have handled a broken arm, 2 severe fevers, a complicated situation that ended well, and a dispute between 2 guards that had resulted in a split lip and a great deal of bruised pride. She had also spent time talking with Caden, not every evening, not with any formal arrangement, but enough that it had become a comfortable thing, rather than an effortful one. He told her about the pack's history from the inside, things that were not in books. The old alliances that were more complicated than the official records showed, the families that held real influence in the council, the problems that had been building quietly while his father was in power and that Caden had inherited along with the title. She told him about her work, about healing, about the way she understood the bond between a healer and the people who came to them for help, that particular kind of trust that was different from any other relationship. One evening she told him about her mother's notebook. She described the parts that had not come up yet, the sections where Sarah wrote about Elena's childhood, the observations her mother had kept for years about the small person she was raising and the woman she was becoming. There was a passage, she said, where Sarah described Elena at age 7, standing at the edge of the forest refusing to come in, even though it was nearly dark, because she had spotted a bird with a damaged wing, and she was not going to leave until she figured out what to do about it. Her mother had written, "She will not leave a thing broken if she thinks she can fix it. This will either make her extraordinary or get her into serious trouble, and possibly both." Caden listened to this and was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Both, I would say." Elena laughed. It surprised her, not the laugh itself, but how uncomplicated it was, how it came out without her having to think about whether it was appropriate or what it revealed. She had not laughed much recently. She had not had much to laugh about. He looked at her when she laughed, and he had that expression again, the one she had started to recognize, the one that was not quite warmth but was adjacent to it and getting closer. She was still thinking about the clause. She was still thinking about the choice. But she was thinking about it differently now than she had been at the beginning. At the beginning, the choice had seemed like it should be obvious. You dissolve the thing that was never truly yours to begin with. You take back your freedom. You build your life on ground that was not laid by someone else's contract. That was still true. It was still a real option, but it was increasingly clear to her that making that choice would not be as clean as she had thought. It would not simply be erasing an obligation. It would be ending something that was growing beyond the obligation. She was honest with herself about that. Then the letters started arriving. The first one came on a Tuesday morning, delivered to the keep from the neighboring pack to the northeast. Elena was in the library when one of the younger scholars came in with it and handed it to her with a slightly uncertain expression. The letter was addressed to Elena Vasquez, keep of the Iron Veil pack, in careful formal handwriting that she did not recognize. She opened it. It was from someone called Owen Marsh. She did not know the name. He introduced himself as a healer and scholar from the Fenwick pack, 2 territories away, who had been studying bond records for most of his adult life. He had heard about the Blood Moon event at the Iron Veil pack from a colleague who had been traveling through the area. He had also heard, through channels he did not specify, about the Snowglass incident and the runes that had appeared in the king's study floor. He was writing to let her know that he had records in his own archive that were directly relevant to her situation. Records about the Vasquez bloodline that went back significantly further than anything the Iron Veil scholars had access to. He would be happy to share them, he wrote, if she was interested. He asked nothing in exchange. She read the letter twice. Then she brought it to Caden. He read it in silence. When he finished, he set it on the desk and looked at it for a moment. "Do you know him?" she asked. "Not personally. The name is familiar. He is well regarded in academic circles as a bond historian. Reputable." He paused. "But I would be careful." "You think he has an ulterior purpose?" "I think anyone who claims to have heard specific details about a private Snowglass event in a private room of my keep, through unspecified channels, has access to information that should not have been accessible. He looked at her. That either means he has very good contacts, which is possible, or it means someone in my household told him, which is worth knowing. She thought about this. It was a reasonable concern. She had thought about it herself. The word Snowglass had not left the study on the night she drank it. The scholars knew about the bond contract and the runes, but the details of the vial and the vision and the silver tears had been between herself and Caden only. I will reply carefully, she said. I will not confirm specific details. I will ask him to tell me more about what he knows before I tell him anything. Caden nodded. Good. She wrote back that afternoon. She was polite and slightly vague, thanking him for the letter, expressing interest in the Vasquez bloodline records in general terms, asking him to describe the nature of the documents he had access to before any exchange was arranged. The reply came back in 4 days, and when she read it, something cold moved through her that had nothing to do with the Snowglass or the bond or the winter. Owen Marsh described, in careful and specific detail, a set of records about the Vasquez bloodline that included not just the general history she already knew, but documents relating to a second contract, not Aldrich's contract, not the agreement with her mother, but something older, something that predated her mother entirely, that had been drawn up by the generation before, and he described, with a precision that left no room for coincidence, a specific event that had been built into the contract, an event that could only be triggered by a particular set of circumstances. Circumstances that matched Elena's situation exactly. She brought this letter to Caden as well. He read it, and this time when he set it down, his expression was not guarded or carefully neutral. He looked at her directly and said, "We need to find out who he is working with." "Yes," she said. "Because this is not a scholar writing out of academic interest," he said. "Someone sent him, someone who knows what happened in this keep, and what the runes said, and what the Snowglass revealed. And they want something." Elena looked out the window at the white courtyard below, the clean, unmarked snow. She thought about her mother's notebook, about the clause, about the decision she had been carefully, patiently working toward in her own time. She thought about how nothing was ever as simple as it first appeared. She thought about how every layer she understood revealed another underneath, and she wondered how deep this went, and who else was involved in a story that she had only recently discovered she was the center of. She turned from the window. Caden was watching her with that steady, waiting attention that she had come to recognize. Not pressure, not urgency, just presence, just him, being there. "Whatever comes next," she said, "we need to figure this out together." He did not look surprised. He looked like a person who had been waiting for a while to hear those words, and was making a conscious effort not to react too visibly. "Agreed," he said. Outside the window the snow kept falling, and in the warmth of the study, Elena Vasquez, and the king she had not chosen, began to plan for the thing that was coming, together, without a contract, without a design, without anything except the clear and honest fact of two people who had decided that whatever was hidden beneath all of this, they were going to find it. Owen Marsh arrived at the Glass Keep on a gray Wednesday morning, 3 days after Elena and Caden sent him a very carefully worded invitation. They had debated the invitation for a full evening before sending it. Caden's initial position was that inviting an unknown person with unknown backing into his home was inadvisable. Elena's position was that keeping him at a distance gave them no information, while inviting him in, on their own terms and in a controlled setting, at least gave them the chance to learn something useful. They had argued, genuinely argued, not the politely restrained disagreements they had been managing since she arrived, but a real back and forth that lasted almost an hour, and at one point got loud enough that a passing servant knocked on the door to make sure everything was all right. Elena thought the argument was healthy. It meant they were actually saying things, instead of managing each other. They agreed to invite him. They also agreed on conditions. He would be received in the library, not the private study, with 2 scholars present throughout. He would not be given access to any of the original documents. If he asked specific questions that required confirming details about the Snowglass event, Elena and Caden had agreed in advance which details were acceptable to confirm and which were not. Owen Marsh was smaller than Elena had expected from his letters. A slight man in his late 40s, with gray-brown hair, and the kind of precise, economical movements that suggested someone more comfortable with books than with open spaces. He was accompanied by an assistant, a young woman named Clara, who carried a large leather satchel, and wrote things down constantly. He was polite, clear-spoken, and looked at Elena with undisguised professional interest that was slightly uncomfortable, but did not seem threatening. He shook Caden's hand in the library doorway and said he appreciated them seeing him, in the tone of a man who had half expected to be turned away. "Let us see what you have first," Caden said. They sat. Dr. Adele and one of the younger scholars were already at the table with notebooks. Clara pulled documents from the satchel and arranged them carefully. Owen began. The older contract he had described in his letter was real. He had the documentation, reproductions, he was careful to say, not originals. The originals were in a locked archive at Fenwick that he would not be bringing out without the Archive Council's authorization. But the copies were detailed enough to read, and he walked them through what they showed. The Vasquez bloodline had been tracked for 6 generations, not by Aldrich Ashvale's people, but by someone else entirely, a network of scholars and healers who called themselves, in the old records, the cartographers. They mapped bloodlines the way geographers map land, looking for patterns, for strengths, for the places where 2 rivers met, and created something stronger than either had been alone. The Vasquez healers had appeared on their maps approximately 4 generations back, identified as a bloodline with extraordinary bond capacity. Not just the ability to form strong bonds with an alpha, but something more specific. The ability to reveal hidden truths within bonds, to make visible what had been obscured, to bring to the surface what had been buried. This was why the tears had gone silver. Not just because of the designed bond, because it was in the blood, older than Aldrich's contract, something Sarah Vasquez had carried, and Elena carried more strongly, apparently, than any previous generation. The cartographers had been tracking this capacity because they wanted to understand it. Specifically, they wanted to understand whether someone with this capacity could be used to identify bonds that had been damaged, artificially imposed bonds that were causing harm to the packs they appeared in. Not designed bonds like the one Aldrich had arranged, but harmful ones. Forced bonds created by people who wanted control over an alpha and had found a way to create the appearance of a legitimate bond without the reality of one. Elena listened to all of this very carefully. She was beginning to understand where this was going. "The Iron Veil Pack," she said. "Is there a damaged bond here?" Owen looked at her with an expression that was almost relieved, the expression of someone who has been building toward a specific point and is grateful not to have to keep building. "Not between you and the king," he said. "The Snowglass would have revealed that." What it revealed instead was the designed bond, which is different, constructed, yes, but not harmful, in the way I mean. He paused. But in the outer reaches of the Iron Veil Pack territory, in the northeastern villages, there have been reports for about 8 months of pack bonds behaving strangely. Wolves unable to feel their connection to the pack, animals acting differently, people reporting a kind of blankness where the bond usually lives, like a space that should be warm going cold. He turned to Caden. "Your scouts have reported some of this. I know because 3 of your reports were shared with the Fenwick Council through your joint border agreement. I read them. That is partly what brought me here." Caden leaned forward slightly. "You think someone is doing this deliberately?" "I think the symptoms are consistent with a specific kind of bond interference that the cartographers documented twice before, in other packs, over the last century," Owen said. "Both times, the interference was being introduced deliberately by an outside party who wanted to destabilize the pack's bond and take control of the territory during the resulting disorder." The room was very quiet for a moment. "And you came to me," Elena said, "because someone with my capacity is the only way to identify where the interference is coming from." "Yes," Owen said. "The silver tears are not just a symptom, they are a tool. What happened in the study floor when you cried, the runes appearing, that is what you can do. You can make hidden things visible. And the source of a damaged bond, once it is visible, can be addressed." Elena sat back in her chair and thought about a 7-year-old girl who would not leave a damaged bird at the edge of the forest because she thought she could fix it. Her mother had written that it would make her extraordinary, or get her into serious trouble. Possibly both. She looked at Caden. He was already looking at her. They had been in this situation before, the moment when new information required a new decision, and the decision required them to figure out together what they were willing to do. She looked at Owen Marsh. "What exactly would this involve?" she asked. He folded his hands on the table. I would need to take you to the northeastern villages, he said. You would need to be close enough to the source of the interference to respond to it. The Snowglass was a controlled event. This would be different, more direct. Your tears would not be prompted. They would respond to what they found. Is it safe? Caden asked. It is not without risk, Owen said honestly. The previous cases we have records of, the bloodline representatives who were asked to do this, experienced tiredness, temporary disorientation, and in one case, a fever that lasted 2 days. But they recovered fully, and in both cases, the source was identified and addressed. Who was responsible in those cases? Elena asked, for the interference. Owen was quiet for a moment. In one case, a rival leader from a neighboring pack. In the other, someone internal. A council member who had been working with an outside group that wanted to fragment the territory. Caden's expression had not changed, but she could see from the set of his shoulders that he was already thinking about his council, about the people who had access to the northeastern reports, about who might have had reason to share information with Owen Marsh's network. Elena thought about the bird at the edge of the forest. She thought about the fact that the pack was experiencing something wrong, and she was the only person who might be able to do something about it. She thought about her mother, who had spent her life doing exactly this, going where she was needed, using what she had, trying to leave things better than she found them. She made her decision before she was fully aware she had made it. I will go, she said. Caden looked at her. I will go with you, he said. It was not a question. She nodded. I know, she said. Owen let out a breath that suggested he had been holding it for most of the conversation. Clara wrote something in her notebook. Dr. Adele said she would like to review the cartographer records before anything was arranged. Owen said of course. Outside the library windows, the gray winter sky held no snow for the first time in days. Elena looked at the clean white courtyard and thought about everything that was coming, the journey, the risk, the thing they were going to face in the northeastern villages, and the much larger question she had still not answered about herself and Caden, and the bond and the choice she had been carrying since the night of the Snowglass. She thought about it all, and she did not feel afraid. She felt the way she felt at the beginning of a complicated case, alert, focused, with the calm that comes not from certainty, but from knowing exactly what her job is. Her job was to go where the broken thing was. Her job was to see it clearly. Her job was to do what she could. She had been doing that job her whole life. She was good at it. She looked back at Caden. He was watching her with that expression again, the one that was getting less difficult to read as the weeks passed. She held his gaze for a moment, and then looked back at Owen Marsh. When do we leave? She asked. They left on a Friday, 4 days after Owen Marsh arrived, in the gray early morning, while the sun was still a suggestion behind the eastern mountains. Elena packed a healer's kit, warm clothes, and her mother's notebook, which she had taken to carrying with her, the way some people carry a talisman. Caden brought 2 guards, not the full escort that his advisors had recommended, but he had declined the larger group on the grounds that they needed to move quietly, and Elena suspected also because he did not want too many eyes on what they were doing until they understood it better themselves. Owen and Clara rode just ahead of them on the road north. The territory was familiar for the first hour. Then they turned northeast onto a track she did not know, and the landscape shifted. The trees grew closer together, and the track narrowed, and the snow was deeper here, untouched. No footprints from humans or animals in either direction. It was very quiet. Elena noticed it first, as a feeling, rather than anything she could name. A slight change in the air, not temperature, not wind, just a quality of the silence that felt different from ordinary winter quiet. Like the ordinary silence you encounter when you step into a room and realize the sound you were hearing before has stopped, and you are only now noticing its absence. You feel it, Caden said. He was riding beside her and watching her face with that attentive stillness she had come to recognize. Something is different, she said carefully. The bond thread is reaching outward. Owen, ahead of them, turned in his saddle. That is what we hoped for. The capacity responds to proximity. We are still half a day from the village. She kept her attention on what she was feeling. It was like the feeling before the Snowglass, that odd extension of awareness, as though she were suddenly able to hear something that had always been there, but always been too quiet to register. The thread in her chest was reaching out into the territory around her like a hand, feeling its way in the dark. By midday, they reached the village. A cluster of 30 or 40 houses around a central square, with a mill at one end and a meeting hall at the other. There were people moving about, ordinary village activity, smoke rising from chimneys, a few children on the edge of the square being called in for a midday meal. On the surface, it looked normal. Then she looked more carefully. The people moved slowly. Not the slow of cold or tiredness, but the slow of something heavier, like carrying a weight they had stopped noticing because it had been there long enough. The faces she could see were not frightened or sad exactly, but there was an absence in them, a quality of looking without seeing, that she recognized from people who were ill, in ways that had nothing to do with their bodies. She dismounted. Owen was already talking quietly to the village elder. Caden stayed close but let her move without directing her. She walked slowly into the center of the square. She stood there for a moment and closed her eyes. The bond thread expanded. She felt it reach in every direction from her chest, not painfully, but with the focused intensity of a sense that is concentrating itself, like a hand searching in darkness, feeling the shapes of things it cannot see. And there, at the northeast edge of the village, past the last row of houses, at the point where the trees began, she felt it. Something cold and deliberate and wrong. Not a presence exactly. A source. The way a wound has a source, even when the pain spreads wider than the wound itself. She opened her eyes and she could already feel the warmth on her cheeks. Her tears had come without her choosing them, the way tears come when they have been called by something stronger than the choice to hold them back. She looked down at her hands, and in the pale winter light, the silver was unmistakable. "It is there," she said. She pointed northeast. "Past the tree line, something is there." Caden was beside her. He looked where she pointed, and then back at her face, and his jaw tightened. "How close do you need to be?" "Closer than this," she said. "Then we go closer," he said. "Simple. Done." She looked at him for one moment, the steadiness of him, the way he stood beside her without trying to move in front of her, or redirect her, or soften what was happening into something more manageable. Just present. Just there. She turned back toward the trees and started walking. The silver on her hands caught the winter light as she moved. Around her the cold air sharpened, and beneath her feet the snow held her weight without a sound. And ahead of them the trees waited, dark and close, keeping whatever was inside them with the patience of things that have been holding on for a very long time. She walked toward it, because that was what she did, because that was who she was. And behind her, exactly one step back, and exactly where she needed him to be, Caden Ashvale kept pace. The trees closed behind them as they entered the forest northeast of the village, and the light changed immediately, filtered, gray-white, the sky visible only in narrow strips between bare branches. The snow on the ground was undisturbed here. No tracks, no trails, not even the prints of small animals. Elena noticed that first. Even in deep winter, forest animals leave marks. The absence of any marks at all felt deliberate. She kept walking. The silver had not faded from her cheeks and hands. If anything, it was stronger now, a steady gleam, rather than just the traces of tears, as though the bond capacity was so fully awake that it was simply present. She could feel her own pulse very clearly, steady and strong, and the thread in her chest was no longer reaching. It had found what it was reaching for, and was now pulling toward it the way a compass needle finds north. Caden walked one step behind her on her right. He had not said anything since they entered the trees. She was grateful for that. She needed to concentrate. Owen and Clara had remained at the village edge. This was deliberate, agreed on in advance. Whatever was at the source of the interference, too many people approaching it might obscure it. Elena needed to get close enough to make it visible, and then they could bring others in. The two guards stayed at the tree line. The forest went on for about a quarter mile before opening into a small clearing, and in the center of the clearing was a stone formation, not natural. A ring of 7 stones, each about waist height, placed in a perfect circle, with careful spacing. The stones were dark with age and slightly iridescent at their edges, catching the thin winter light in a way that suggested they had been treated with something. Between the stones the ground was bare. No snow inside the ring, even though snow lay all around it up to the edges of the outermost stones. The bare ground was dark and packed hard, and in it Elena could see, faintly, markings, geometric shapes, lines, a pattern that had been carved into the earth. She stopped at the edge of the clearing. She looked at the stones. She looked at the patterns on the ground. She looked at the perfect circle where no snow had fallen. Bond stones, she said. She had read about them. Deeply historical. The kind of thing you found in the records of the oldest pack territories, predating formal pack structures. They were used for bond work at a level that most modern healers considered theoretical, things that had been understood by practitioners 2 or 3 centuries ago, and then largely lost or abandoned because they required capacities and knowledge that had become rare. They were also, in the wrong hands, instruments of exactly the kind of interference Owen had described. A set of bond stones placed within a territory could be used to suppress the bonds within it, not break them outright, which would be obvious, but dull them, create that blankness Owen had described, that warm space going cold. Someone placed these here, Caden said. Someone who knew what they were doing, Elena said. This took planning. These stones did not appear here by chance. She moved into the clearing. At the edge of the ring, she crouched down and looked at the markings on the ground more carefully, and the silver on her face began to fall. She was not crying in the way that emotion makes a person cry. It was the same thing that had happened on the floor of Caden's study. The tears responding to what was here, making it visible, bringing hidden things into the light. The drops fell from her cheeks onto the bare dark ground, and where they touched, the markings became bright. And the markings said something. She could read it. Her mother's training, the healer's education she had grown up in, included elements from sources that most healers did not have access to. Sarah Vasquez had been meticulous about the old knowledge. She had passed it to her daughter, line by line, year by year. Elena read the markings. She read all of them, and what they told her made everything inside her go very still, not with fear, but with the particular steadiness that comes when you understand a situation fully and know exactly how serious it is. She stood up and turned to Caden. He was already watching her with that expression, present, ready, without alarm, without pushing her, waiting for what she had found. Someone on your council placed these, she said. He did not flinch. Which one? The markings carry an identifier, she said. It is not a name, but it is specific enough. Someone who sits on your left at the formal council table. Someone who has been in regular contact with a pack to the east. The records reference an eastern marking, I recognize from the documents Owen brought. Someone who has been doing this for approximately 9 months. She watched him think. She watched him run through the faces at his council table, and she watched the moment when something clicked into place behind his eyes, when a piece of information he already had connected to a piece of information she had just given him, and she could see from the quiet change in his face that he had a name. He did not say it aloud in the clearing. They were standing in an open space that might still be being watched, and he had learned long ago not to show his hand until he was certain where the cards fell. "Can you deactivate the stones?" he asked. She looked at the ring again. She thought about what she had read, what she knew, what she had been trained to understand. "Yes," she said, "but not alone. I need help from someone who understands bondwork mechanics. Owen might have the knowledge for it." "We bring Owen in," he said immediately, "and we bring in more guards to secure the area." Agreed. She paused. "And when the stones are deactivated, the people in these villages, the people who have been living under this suppression, they will feel the bonds come back. It might be disorienting. Someone should be there to explain what is happening." "I will be there," he said. She looked at him. "You do not have to do everything yourself." "I am the king of this territory," he said quietly. "When something has been done to my people without their consent, I should be the one to face them when it is undone. It is the right thing to do." She held his gaze. The winter light came through the bare branches above them in thin, pale strips, and the silver on her face had dried, and the stone ring held its cold silence behind her, and she was aware, very clearly, in a way that had nothing to do with any contract or design or arranged connection, that she was looking at a man she respected. Not just respected, something warmer than that, something she was not quite ready to say yet. "All right," she said, "let us bring Owen in." They sent the guard back to the tree line with the signal they had agreed on, and while they waited, she stood beside Caden in the cold clearing, and neither of them felt the need to fill the silence with words, and that was its own kind of answer to a question she had been asking herself for weeks. When Owen arrived and saw the stone ring, His face went through several distinct expressions before settling on focused professional attention. He walked around the ring twice, reading the markings with the same kind of comprehension Elena had, and then he looked at her. "Can you do this?" he asked. "With your guidance on the mechanical elements," she said. "I know the principle. I am not certain of the specific sequence." He nodded. He reached into Clara's satchel and pulled out a worn document that he held carefully in both hands. "This is the process. I have read it more than 20 times. I think between us it is possible." "Between us, yes," she said. It took the better part of the afternoon. It was careful, demanding work, the kind she was good at, the kind that required concentration and patience and absolute precision. She worked with the silver that was already in her tears, using it the way a healer uses an instrument, and Owen guided the sequence and held the reference document, and twice caught a variation in the stone pattern that she had been about to miss. Clara documented everything. Caden stood at the clearing's edge with his guards and watched the tree line and let them work without interfering. When the last stone went dark, the change in the air was immediate and total. It was like a window opening, like stepping from a dim room into clear air. Elena felt it move outward from the clearing in a slow, expanding wave, through the trees, into the village, across the frozen fields, through the bonds of every person in the northeastern territory who had been living under that cold, dull suppression for 9 months. She felt it go, and she felt what replaced it, and it was exactly what it was supposed to feel like. The warmth of connection, ordinary and vital and real. She sat down in the snow at the edge of the clearing. She was very tired. The kind of tired that lives in the bones rather than just the muscles. Owen had warned her about this. She had believed him, but had not fully prepared for how thorough it would be. Caden was beside her, before she had consciously registered that she was sitting down. He did not pull her to her feet, or urge her up. He sat beside her in the snow, which meant his dark coat was going to be soaked through, and he did not seem to care about that at all. "Done?" he said. "Done," she said. "Good work." She laughed a little, quietly, at the understatement of it. He looked sideways at her, and there was that thing at the corners of his mouth again. Not quite a smile, but she had started to notice that almost smile, the careful approximation of it that came through when he forgot to keep it back. "We should get you back to the keep," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "In a moment." She sat in the snow for another few minutes, breathing the cleared air, feeling the warmth radiating outward through the territory around her. The bond thread in her chest was quiet and even, and settled, not straining, not reaching, not carrying the weight of everything that had been unresolved, just present, comfortable. She thought about the clause, about the choice. She had been carrying it for weeks, turning it over with the care of someone who knows it matters and is not willing to rush it. And she realized, sitting in the snow of a clearing, where the wrong had been undone, and the warmth was coming back, and Caden Ashvale was beside her with wet knees and no complaints, that she had already made her decision. She had made it some time ago, probably. She had just been waiting until she was sure it was truly hers, not the bonds, not her mother's contract, not anyone else's design. It was hers. She was certain. She would tell him, but not here, not today. Today was for the villages and the people whose bonds were waking up, and for the council member, who was going to have a very difficult conversation with the king very soon. Today had been full enough. She let herself rest for a moment longer beside him in the snow, and the winter light held steady above them, and the forest breathed around them, and everything was quiet in the best possible way. They came back to the keep in the early evening, riding in the last light of a winter day that had left no room for anything except the task it had demanded of them. Elena slept most of the next day, which was the first time she had slept that completely and without interruption since before the blood moon. When she woke, the room was full of afternoon light, and the ache in her bones had eased, and she lay still for a while, and let herself simply be awake, without immediately doing anything with it. She heard, through the door of her room, the sounds of the keep going on around her. Footsteps in the corridor, someone calling to someone else about a delivery that had arrived, the distant sound of a door and a brief burst of cold air, and then quiet again. The ordinary sounds of a place that was inhabited and functional and alive. She had grown used to those sounds. She had not noticed that she had grown used to them until just now, lying in the afternoon light, and realizing she found them comfortable. She got up and dressed and went downstairs. The next 3 days were the most organized activity she had experienced in recent memory. The council member was identified, a man named Gerald Crane, who had sat on the Iron Vale Council for 11 years and who, it emerged under a very thorough and uncomfortable examination, had been approached by the neighboring Eastern Pack almost a year ago, with an offer he had accepted for reasons that turned out to be more personal than political. His family had significant debts. Someone had offered to clear them in exchange for what, at the time, he had told himself was minor assistance. The assistance had grown. The stone ring had been installed by people who worked for the Eastern Pack, on a schedule Gerald had helped arrange, on grounds he had helped them access. He did not look dangerous when he confessed this. He looked like a tired man who had made a terrible choice, and had been waiting for a long time to stop carrying it. Elena was not in the room for the formal proceedings. That was Caden's domain, and rightly so, but she heard about them from Dr. Penn, who had it from one of the senior guards who had been present throughout. The Eastern Pack's leadership was notified through official channels that their activity in Iron Vale territory had been discovered and documented, and that this would have formal consequences through the joint council that oversaw interpack relations. That process would take months, but the immediate damage was undone. The pack bonds in the northeast were warm and functional again, and the village elder sent a letter to the keep, thanking the king and his people for what had been done. Caden told her about Gerald Crane one evening when she found him in his study, later than usual, sitting with the fire low and the lamps not yet lit, and a cup of tea that had gone cold on the edge of the desk. He described the confession without editorial commentary, just the facts, but she could hear underneath the careful recitation how much it had affected him. Not that one of his council had acted against him, though that was its own wound, but that it had been ongoing for months, and he had not seen it. "You could not have known," she said. "I should have been more attentive to the Northeast reports," he said. "You were dealing with a great deal of other things," she said. He looked at her. "You do not have to soften it." "I am not softening it," she said. "I am being accurate. You are one person managing an enormous amount of responsibility, and one of the people you trusted turned out not to be trustworthy. That is not a failure of your attention. It is a thing that happens." He was quiet for a moment. "You are very direct." "I was raised by a woman who thought vagueness was a form of dishonesty," she said. He almost smiled. There it was, that careful, almost smile. She pulled the chair from across his desk around to his side, and sat in it, and looked at the low fire and said, "I have something to tell you." He waited. "I made my decision," she said. "About the bond. About the clause." She felt him go still beside her. "I am not dissolving it," she said. "That is the decision. I am not going to perform the rite. The designed elements, the contract, my mother's agreement, I am releasing all of that, because I do not want it any more than you did, and it does not belong to either of us. But the bond itself, what has grown between us, that has nothing to do with your father or my mother or the Snowglass or the cartographers or any of it, that is mine. That is real. I am keeping it." He was very quiet. She looked sideways at him and found him looking at her, and his face had done the thing it did when the walls came fully down, open and tired and honest, and something else that she could name now without difficulty. "You do not have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "That is why I am doing it." She saw him breathe, slow and deep and careful, the breath of a person absorbing something that is larger than they were prepared for. He looked at the fire, and then at his hands, and then at her, and she watched all of it. "I should tell you something as well," he said. "All right?" He looked directly at her, and whatever had been left of the walls was simply gone. "I rejected the bond because I thought it was protecting you," he said, "and I have spent weeks since then hoping you would decide to stay. Not because of the contract, not because of the design, because of you." He stopped, started again. "Because of the woman who came to my door and refused to be frightened of me, and read 12 documents in 2 days, and came back with better questions than my scholars had thought of, and laughed in my study, and argued with me for an hour about a letter, and walked into a dark forest, toward something unknown without flinching." He paused. "That is who I was hoping would choose to stay." Elena looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. "I could tell." He made a sound that was almost a laugh, quiet and reluctant, and surprised out of him. She liked it. She had not heard him come close to laughing before, and she filed it away carefully. "We have a great deal to figure out," she said. I am not moving immediately into some formal role without a real conversation about what that looks like and what I am and am not willing to do. I have conditions. I expected conditions, he said. I want full access to continue my healer's work, she said. Not as a ceremonial role, but actual work with Dr. Penn and her team. I want a seat at the council, with a real voice in it, not a decorative presence. I want us to talk about everything, including the things that are difficult. No more walls for the important things. Agreed, he said. All of it. She looked at him. You agreed very quickly. I have been thinking about it for weeks, he said. The answers were not complicated. She laughed, fully, the uncomplicated way it had come out that first time in his study, and he watched it happen, with that expression on his face, that was no longer quite an almost smile. It was a real one, small and quiet and entirely genuine. Good, she said. Outside the study windows, the winter night was clear for the first time in weeks. The stars were visible through the glass, bright and numerous, and cold and indifferent, the way stars always are. They do not care about contracts or designed bonds or clever clauses hidden in old agreements. They just shine. Inside, the fire was beginning to warm again. Elena reached over and picked up his cold cup of tea and handed it back to him. Drink that, she said. You have been sitting here with it for an hour. He took it without argument. She was already deciding what needed to be arranged. The conversation with Owen about documenting the stone ring deactivation properly. The follow-up with Dr. Penn about the village patients who would need checking on as their bonds recovered. The talk she needed to have with the young council member who had taken Gerald Crane's seat and who seemed earnest and very nervous, and who she thought might benefit from someone telling him that nervous and earnest was a reasonable starting point. There was a great deal to do. She had always known how to be busy. She had always known how to make herself useful in ways that also happened to be exactly what she wanted for her own life. She was going to be very good at this. She looked at Caden, who was drinking the cold tea without complaint, and she thought about the courtyard and the red moon, and 4 words that had landed in her chest like stones, and she thought about the silver in her tears, and the runes on the floor, and the frozen clearing, and the choice she had made with her own hands, freely and without condition. She thought, it is strange how things work, how a night that feels like an ending is sometimes just the very loud beginning of something else entirely. She picked up the document she had brought down to show him about the Northeastern Village recovery plans, and she spread it on the desk between them, and they began. Spring came to the Iron Vale territory, on a morning that smelled of cold ground thawing, and the first green smell underneath it, that particular scent that comes before anything is actually visible, before leaves, before shoots, before any obvious sign of change. You simply walk outside one morning and the air smells different, and you know the season has turned. Elena noticed it at the window of her east-facing room, which she had stopped thinking of as a temporary room sometime in January, and simply thought of as her room now. She stood with her mug of tea and looked at the courtyard below, at the snow that was retreating from the stones in slow gray patches, and she breathed the changed air in. Months had passed since the clearing in the northeast forest. A great deal had happened, and a great deal had been arranged, and a great deal was still being worked out, as is the nature of anything real and ongoing. The council had new composition. The northeast villages had recovered fully, their bonds warm and stable, their connection to the pack restored. Owen Marsh had returned to Fenwick with a great many notes and an open invitation to return, which Elena was fairly certain he would take up. Dr. Penn had gotten 2 additional healers added to her team, following an argument Elena had made to the council that was, by her own assessment, probably the best argument she had made since arriving. The formal announcement of her role had been made in February, not a grand ceremony. She had requested something quiet, and Caden had agreed without the slightest resistance. A council meeting, a recorded declaration, and a dinner afterward with the immediate staff. No spectacle. Just the fact of it, stated clearly, and then moved past, because there was work to do, and spectacle got in the way of work. The pack had adjusted. Most of them had adjusted faster and more generously than she had expected, which she thought had more to do with her months of visible presence in the healing quarters than with any official announcement. By the time the announcement came, she was already simply there, already woven into the function of the place, already someone that people came to when they needed help and left from feeling better. The announcement mostly just made official what had already been true for some time. There were people who objected. There would always be people who objected to any significant change, and she had made peace with that early on, because she had not come here to win everyone's approval. She had come here because she had chosen to. She heard her name from the corridor, someone passing, calling to someone else, something about the morning schedules. Her name in a voice she did not know well yet, said with the easy, casual familiarity of someone who thought of her as simply part of things. Elena. Not the rejected Luna. Not the healer from the cottage. Not anyone's compromise or anyone's curiosity. Just Elena. She drank her tea and looked at the spring morning. Behind her, the door opened without a knock, which meant it was Caden. He was the only one who had the particular quality of presence that she felt before he was fully in the room, the sense of a specific gravity rearranging around him. She did not turn yet. The Northeast Council messenger arrived, he said. The formal acknowledgement from the Eastern Pac leadership came through. Good, she said. Dr. Penn wants to discuss the spring wellness assessment schedule with you when you have time. This afternoon, she said. He came to stand beside her at the window. He stood the way he always stood, contained, upright, that presence that was still somehow both less imposing and more substantial than it had seemed in the beginning, when she had not known yet that the containment was protective rather than cold. He looked at the courtyard and the retreating snow. It smells different today, he said. Spring, she said. The first real day of it. He nodded. She turned to look at him. He looked back. This was a thing they did frequently, simply looked at each other without immediate purpose, just the comfortable presence of someone who knew you well enough that looking at them was its own quiet satisfaction. The bond thread was steady and warm and entirely at ease. It had felt like that since the night she had told him her decision. Not the reaching or the aching, or the ghost pull of the weeks before. Just warmth, constant and reliable, like a fire that has been properly fed and burns without drama. She thought about the blood moon courtyard. She thought about 4 words falling like stones. She thought about the silver tears she had not understood, and her mother's notebook, and the cold study floor covered in runes, and the clearing in the northeast forest, and the long, careful work of 2 people dismantling their walls in the right order, at the right pace, with the kind of honesty that made things real, rather than just arranged. She thought about her mother's claws, the door hidden inside the thing itself. She had dissolved the designed elements of the bond formally, in a small private event 2 months ago, with Owen present as a witness, and the cartographer records open on the desk for reference. She had taken apart what her mother and Aldrich Ashvale had built, piece by piece, until what remained was only what had grown, without being planted. What remained was substantial. There is a village council meeting in the eastern reaches on Thursday, she said. I want to go. 3 of the families there have been dealing with a respiratory illness that Dr. Penn's team has not been able to fully resolve, and I have a theory about the water source. I want to look at it directly. I will arrange the travel, he said. I do not need you to come, she said. I will take 1 guard and be fine. I know, he said. I will come anyway. She looked at him. You have 3 meetings Thursday, 2 of which can be moved, and 1 of which can be managed by the deputy council chair, who needs more practice doing exactly that. She thought about arguing. She considered it from several angles and concluded that she did not actually want to, because she had found that she liked having him there, not because she needed him, but because his presence had become one of the things she valued, without being able to fully explain why, the way you value the specific sound of wind in a particular kind of tree, or the smell of a certain herb drying in a warm room. It was not logic, it was just true. Fine, she said, but you let me do the water assessment without directing it. Always, he said. She turned back to the window. The spring air was coming through the slight gap she had left at the bottom, cool and clear, and full of that green underneath smell. In the courtyard below, one of the younger guards was crossing the clean stone, and he was moving with more energy than people usually moved with in the morning, and she thought that was probably the spring too, the way it gets into everyone's step before anyone has consciously registered the change. She thought about the silver in her tears. She had not cried silver since the northeast clearing. She did not know if that would happen again, if the capacity was permanent, or came when it was needed, if she would need it again, or if the work it had done was complete for now. She kept the knowledge of it close, the way she kept all her healer's knowledge, ready, but not worried about readiness. She thought about her mother's notebook, sitting on the shelf of this room, that was her room. She had read it many more times since the first night. There was a passage near the end, one of the last things Sarah had written in it, clearly added not long before she died, that Elena had memorized without trying, the way certain things lodge in memory because they are said exactly right. Her mother had written, "I hope you find that what I built for you and what you build for yourself turn out to be the same thing. I tried to give you the tools, the knowledge, the place, and the room to choose. If I did it right, you will not feel the difference between the life you were born toward and the life you decided to have. They will feel like one thing. And that is all I ever wanted." Elena had thought about that passage a great deal. She had decided her mother had done it approximately right. Not perfectly. The secrecy had cost them both, and the choice should have always been explicit, and there were things she would have done differently. But the spirit of it was right. The tools were there. The knowledge was there. The room to choose had been there, even when it had not felt that way. She had chosen. She was choosing still, every day, in the accumulation of small decisions that made up an actual life. She looked at Caden one more time. He was watching the courtyard with the steady attentiveness he brought to most things, and the morning light was on his face, and he looked like himself. Not the king from the ceremony, not the cold authority from the night of the blood moon, but the person she had come to know over months of real conversation and arguments and work and quiet mornings exactly like this one. She thought, "I am glad I stayed." Not because of the contract, not because of the bond, not because of her mother's plan or Aldrich's design or anyone's intention for her life. Because this was her choice, made with her own hands, from her own knowing, in her own time. She was glad she had made it. The spring air moved through the room, and outside the courtyard was coming alive, and somewhere in the northeast of the territory, hundreds of people were going about their mornings with their bonds warm and intact and unremarkable, which was exactly how bonds should be, ordinary and quiet and simply there, the way warmth is simply there, when the fire has been burning long enough. Elena finished her tea. She set the mug down. "Come on," she said. "We have work to do." She walked toward the door, and he followed, and the glass keep held them both, not as captor and captive, not as king and obligation, not as two people bound by anything, except what they had built in the long careful months between then and now. Just two people who had chosen each other, clearly and without condition, in the fullest light they could find. That was the whole story. That was all of it. And it was enough.